Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Rooney. I'm the AESA Business Director, and I'm very, very happy to introduce Dr. Joseph Goins of Pathway to Careers and NS4ED. He's the Chief Executive Officer, and today he's going to present to us the supplemental algebra and geometry curriculum, as well as his new platform. Joseph?
Yep, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time, and those that know me, hopefully you guys know I'm a big fan of the Education Service Agency and the work that each of you guys do. And so it's always a privilege to get a chance to present and talk with each of you guys. So what I thought I would do is walk very quickly on maybe a background of our company, what we do and what we're trying to accomplish. I've been doing this for 30 plus years. Was an educator before that, taught in the classroom. So as we go through this, if there's questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to go through this very quickly. I put up a quote up on the screen, one of my favorite quotes: to find out what one is fitted to do and to secure an opportunity to do that is the key to happiness. And this was a quote by John Dewey. John Dewey stated this quote back in, I believe, the early 1900s. And sometimes I think it's something we still are thinking about today in education. How do we find the opportunities and give kids an opportunity to secure that pathway? And so love that quote. My agenda today is very quickly. Introduction, background. I want to give you a little bit of a background to what we've been doing. And then I want to talk about mathematics, and our big goal here is, can we actually answer the question, why? When will I ever need to use this? And hopefully at the end of this, we'll have an answer for the participants. And again, feel free to ask questions in the chat, or Chris or you or Ann, let me know if there's questions as I go through this, okay? So real quick about us. We are, I like to say, we have been a company that's focused on research, that likes to impact policy, that leads to better practice. And we actually do all three of these. We focus on research projects. We support several state and national research projects across the country. And we also do a lot of policy work to where we come alongside service centers and states, and we look at their policies as it relates to career. And then ultimately the goal of impacting the classroom, which is where we are going to focus some of our energy today, okay? So, so that's a little bit about us. Real quick, my name is Joseph Goins. I've been doing this for 30 years. Did my, taught in the state of Tennessee. I've worked in almost every state in the country. Did my doctorate in leadership and policy. We have a very diverse staff that we work with. We have an inclusion expert. We have a migrant ed coordinator. And so there's different people we work with in the country throughout our work. But if it's okay, before we get into the math, I want to pause for 1 second. I'm going to change my screen. And I want to share a little bit about the work we've been doing across the country to support service centers. So I am showing our Pathway to Careers website. So one of the things I say we've been doing is a lot of policy work. And we've been doing that in the state of New Mexico. And this is what it looks like. So we started supporting the early college high school 5 years ago through High Plains Regional Education Cooperative. And we do the entire state of New Mexico. We are on our 5th year. And so we come alongside the state and the service center, and we develop resources to support that effort. And so everything you see on the screen, we have developed and managed and maintained everything from design principles. So what does equity look like? How do you obtain equity? And so we've been running this summer leadership series on each of these: leadership as a core, equitable access. And so we've been doing all this through Service Center, and we just started doing the same project in the state of Massachusetts through another service center. And so our work really lends itself to service centers, but we started this work 5 years ago. And through that work, we were asked if we could turn around and map all of the labor market data and all of the career pathways to every individual school district. So once we did, we started looking at that, and I said, you know what, I think if we do this and if we do it effectively, we can do it for every state in the country and for all the service centers. And so what I'll do is I'm going to log into another service center, and we will look at Nebraska. So we've done Nebraska in particular. If you guys know TED, Education Service Center, Unit 2. So we just deployed his platform, and so what we do when we do this, we pull all of the labor market data, and we had 4 simple goals. Goal number 1 was, how do we take something that is historically complicated and how do we make it easy? And so how do we take complicated, make it easy? How do we make it user-friendly? And then lastly, how do we make it low cost, low risk? And so what we've done here, and just going through this very quickly, I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at TED Service Center. There's all of TED's school districts that work within his service center. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give you a breakdown of what those regions look like. So let's pick on Fremont. And we have this little thing here saying your primary workforce region is the Northeast, but you're also associated to these. And so if I put up a map, we can take a look at where's the Northeast. And so we're looking at Fremont, and so you can kind of see that workforce region. But when I click go, what we're going to do is we're going to describe that community. So here's Fremont Public Schools. Here's the population within Fremont. Here's your gender breakdown. Here is your population by age within your community. Here is your race and ethnicity. So what does that community actually look like? Here are your skill sets. What type of education exists within that community? What does your economic development look like? Percent in the labor force, median household income. What are the sectors people have a tendency to work at? What is your labor shed? And so what we're showing here is where do people work versus where do people live? And what we want to show are commuting patterns. How far do people commute, in what direction? And then lastly, we connect them to all of their job markets. So what are the top 5 career clusters by openings, by wages, and largest projected growth? And we just updated this, and we were able to find 2019 data. And so to give you an example, we can update states and service centers pretty much whenever the data is available. And I think post-COVID-19, this is going to become really important. Anything we have, we can print a report. So as a service center or as individual school districts that you're supporting, I'm going to go back to the home page real quick. All of that was in Explore Your Area. Explore Career Clusters is what I call the deep dive. And we're going to jump into the curriculum in just a second. I want to pull you through the policy implications first, and then we're going to get into the curriculum. So here's all the 16 career clusters. So let's say hypothetically, Fremont wanted to do a health academy. I can go back and find Fremont. And by the way, I can look at any of my clusters here. I can also look at any of my pathways. And so we can go here and I can say go, and I can look at all the data. And so we have 4 pages of data in the Fremont area related to health. I can sort by just clicking on the buttons, right? All kinds of sort features. I can export this to an Excel document so you can utilize it. But this is a really powerful thing we did. You can run your Perkins 5. So Perkins 5 says you must be able to do high wage, high growth. And so we can do that by just clicking a button. And if you remember, there were 4 pages. Now there is only 1 page. And so basically what we've done, we have eliminated anything not considered high wage, high growth. And by the way, this is really good. There's lots of jobs here. 140 jobs in nursing, average pay 62,000, projected new jobs, 128, 6% growth. And so that's really good. And so all of this, again, I can export it, I can put it in a PDF, and you have the data you need. And so as we were thinking about curriculum and how do we bridge this gap? So first, let me show you the Perkins report. So here's your Perkins report, which is required by law now, is to understand high wage, high growth. And again, we can do it by service center and obviously include all of your school districts in that mapping. And I do want to show one more thing, and then we're going to jump out of here. So we have a whole section just called reports. And so let's imagine I was back in Fremont and I wanted to open some career academies in health, but I wanted to convey that to parents. How do I convey that to parents while we're doing it? So we went back and started building what we call cluster maps. And I would just want to pull it up real quick. And so what we did is we overlaid job zones with openings. So in other words, if your student completes high school, but does not decide to go further, here's the job market. If I go get my community college degree, here's what that looks like, right? And so what we're doing is trying to create a visual for schools to have both in counseling with parents to say, here's your mapping, right? Here's what that market actually looks like, right? And we can do it on lots of things. And so again, let's say I want to do construction, architecture and construction. You're going to see a completely different mapping. I have not run this one, but I have a pretty good guess. You're going to see lots of job zones 1 and 2 because I can find a job in the construction industry, right? But I also have a very robust market in job zone 3 and 4. And so these maps we built to really lend itself to that. And so when we started thinking about, we provide technical assistance, and now we provide a policy tool to help people understand it. Last year, we were approached by another state, and what that state wanted to understand is, could we develop an approach to mathematics and understand how that's utilized in careers? And I always like to start with this question, do we need to change how we do mathematics? And I think that's the first question people have to ask. Do we need to change? And I just pulled the NAEP data, and you guys know this. I didn't pull any state data, but you know, we've got some flat scores there on math and the trend. And when you start to think about marginalized learners, it really becomes a pretty serious equity issue, is how do we close this gap? And one of the research things we've been looking at is, what is the disconnect? I was a high school math teacher. We've been doing math for a long time. And I said, well, what's the disconnect? And I started putting together some research. And so what you really start to understand is engagement. What happens as a student progresses through K-12? 80%, almost 80% of elementary students feel engaged. And as they get to that high school environment, we lose engagement. And I think a lot of it has to do, as you progress, especially say in mathematics, you get to topics that become very abstract. And we're really good at procedure, and we've been doing that very well for a long time. And so what I want to propose is not connecting students to their interest and to their careers matters. And I'm going to fly through this research. First, we know it has an economic impact. Right now, we know the student loan debt in America is about $1.8 trillion. And that's a big problem even as we look at COVID and coming out of COVID in the next year. What's that going to do? Well, we also know that most high-paying jobs are going to require an industry certificate, associate degree, and/or an advanced degree moving forward. And you might say, well, that's really important. And it's important because it's probably one of the biggest equity issues that we're facing. Less than 10% of the students that are from the lower quartile earn a degree. So when you pause and you think about, we know most jobs require a degree, but we also now know that only 10% of the students in the bottom quartile are earning a degree. That's a big issue. And the issue is compounded. I think everybody understands it in light of what's going on in our world today. And so I think it's important as educators, we really think about that. And we also know from research, these are 3 statistics I would tell anybody, kind of remember these. We have a 43% college completion rate. We have a 40% underemployment rate. So of the 43% that earn a degree, 40% of them cannot get a job in their major. And we have an 80% revolving conversation to where businesses are saying they don't get the skills they want. And so what we do is we're trying to apply the research in developing a math. And again, I'm going to go through this research and really try to get to the heart of what we want to talk about. But this is research from the National Dropout Prevention Network. And what they looked at was a regression analysis. Where should we spend our money to have an impact on dropouts? Well, what they found was if you show students that are considered at risk a career pathway, you have an 81% chance of impacting their decision not to drop out versus 11% of academic support. And so what we really got to do is we got to kind of pause and get people focused on a career. Lastly, this was a study that came out this year in Connecticut. Connecticut wanted to understand the impact career technical education was having. And what they found were 2 things. One, I don't think will surprise anybody, was that first, students that went through career tech actually earned more money than students that were in traditional academic pathways. But what they found that I think is really important as educators, it actually had a substantial impact on academic performance. And it increased academic performance as they were learning through CTE. And that's something that I think we've been looking at. When students experience purpose, so when I feel like I have purpose in learning, what's going to happen? And this is what research says. I'm more motivated to learn. I'm more engaged. I persist longer. I will actually complete my courses. I will retain the information. And then lastly, I perform better. And so I think the Connecticut study more or less highlighted that. And so what we wanted to do when we were thinking about solutions to the math problem, we said, you know what we're going to do is we're going to make math less abstract and we're going to make it more concrete. We're going to connect it to meaningful, authentic situations. And then we're going to bridge the gap between careers. And so what we started with was, can we make it in the context of a viable career every lesson? Can we build that relationship between proficiency and successful job performance? And then can we connect them to purpose? And so we've been developing this for about a year. What I want to show you just really quickly is our approach, and then we'll log on and we'll take a quick look at what that looks like. So we started with this idea with algebra and geometry. So right now we're focused on algebra and geometry as core subject areas. And what we've done is we've identified over 100 high-wage, high-growth occupations. So going back to that definition I showed you in our policy tool, how do we show a pathway that leads to high growth, high wage for students? And what you see on the screen is every lesson we will start with a career spotlight. Here is an actual career. This career is going to use volumes of cylinders, cones, and spheres. You are an agriculture engineer. By the way, here's the job outlook. Here's how much money you can make. Here's where you can go work, and so on. And so we really want to start with, let's start with that engagement and that career model first. And so I'm going to pause for 5 seconds. I know I've been talking for 16, 17 minutes without a break, but Chris, Tom, Any questions as I'm just jumping into the surface level of it? Feel free to post them in chat, unmute. Okay, I'm going to continue, but again, if you have questions, feel free to ask or post, okay? So here's an example of a table of contents we've built for algebra. We've taken every lesson, aligned it to Common Core, but then we've gone out and identified a high wage, high occupation that actually utilizes that skill. And so as a student goes through algebra, they will actually be presented with over 100 occupations. And so we have two goals. One of our hidden goals is we want to create exposure. A lot of students don't have exposure to careers. They don't have exposure to pathways. And what we want to do is give them this broad range as they go through the learning process. Second, every single lesson will begin with this comprehensive career review, job duties, education, types of employers, labor market demand, related tasks. And then we will start by showing these overviews on exactly how they can connect. When we're in the online system, they can save the careers to a portfolio. And when I explain the assessment, we have an assessment that will give them a level of preparedness for these occupations. So here's an example. As they start the lesson, we're going to, quote, step into the career. So we introduce the career. This entire lesson will be through the lens of being an agriculture engineer. So here I work in the agriculture industry. I'm designing a farm storage system. I've got to calculate the pounds of corn. And so I've got to devise a plan. And so we step into the career, and then you will apply it. So they will be on the job. Here is an example to where I've got to calculate the volume of a cylinder to build a fishery. Then I will practice it. Here is an example to where I'm still an agriculture engineer, but I've got to build an irrigation model, and I've got to transport water to my irrigation locations. And so again, real world application through the lens, embedded all the way throughout. Lastly, they will get a chance for a career spotlight, and we will check their understanding. This particular one, they are actually doing aqua farming, and they will be doing a check your understanding on that lesson, right? And so again, we are doing it for geometry and for algebra. Lessons have been aligned to Common Core. We've done an explicit job on the standards, which I'll show you. And we are writing rubrics to evaluate those. Again, I will show you this. We've also built a side-by-side teacher's edition. So we actually will give the teacher the ability, we will give them guided questions, enrichment activities, how to utilize the technology in the classroom. So we more or less are trying to build teacher supports to facilitate that lesson as well. And then lastly, and then I'm going to go show it, and this I'm incredibly excited about. So we partnered with a company called Metametrics. And for those that are on the call today or might have stumbled on this and are listening to it, Metametrics actually developed the Lexile measure for reading. So if you ever hear somebody say, I'm reading at grade 4.5 or 6.7, that's called a Lexile measure. Well, Metametrics also have developed a quantile measure measuring mathematics to where we can show growth over time. So we can actually measure learning over time. And what we've built is a beginning of the year, a middle of the year, and an end of the year assessment. And we will be able to show that on a quantile measure. Now, this is true with or without our content. Metametrics works independently with us. We have partnered with them to put their assessment on top of our curriculum. And one of the biggest reasons we've done that is because Metametrics on their own went out and created a career measure on every single occupation. So they have a database, and we can actually give the student data that says, based upon the quantile measure, here's a lower measure, a typical, and a higher quantile measure. So we'll be able to show that to the student, and here's what that looks like. So if I score at the beginning of the year, so I'll pick on Chris. I see you're on. So Chris, let's say Chris scores an 800 at the beginning of the year on his quantile measure. We'll be able to draw a vertical line and say, Chris, here are the occupations that you kind of fit for. But let's say at the middle of the year assessment, you score 1,000. Well, you went way up on the occupations and the measure. And then lastly, let's say at the end of the year, you're 1,200. You qualify for almost every occupation that exists. And so that's an example of what that assessment looks like. And I'm going to pause for a minute and answer Tom's question, but I want to show the curriculum live too. But that's what the assessment blended with the curriculum actually starts to look like. So Tom, your question, how do math teachers that have taught using traditional methods respond to this curriculum? Well, first off, very good question, Tom. And I've been doing this for 30 years. Believe it or not, I actually worked for a textbook publisher of math for 10 years. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And one of the things that I think we've tried to address kind of at the beginning of this is we're trying to provide content and application and the contextual framework that maybe a traditional math teacher cannot provide. So if you think about what we're doing, and let me pull up some lessons for you, Tom, and give you that in the context of that and give you an example of what that looks like. Because I think it'll help. And so we really think we are a perfect blended learning model because the teacher can do the traditional and then we can map back to the contextual framework on what we're doing. So I pulled up an example of a lesson. This particular lesson is on equations and formulas. I'm embedded in the career as an electrician. So again, side-by-side comparison, I've got my teacher lesson. I logged on to the system as an administrator. So I've got my student view. So I'm looking at a view by the student, and then I've got my teacher view to where the teacher's gonna have guided questions, but we're also giving the teacher the knowledge of what careers look like. And so I've been doing this a long time, and I think we've also got the ability to bridge the gap to help teachers become familiar with that career. So you can see I'm on and I'm looking at lessons. Here I'm an accounting clerk. I can look at my Common Core standard. So what are we trying to cover in Common Core? What are we trying to do? So I can look at this as a student lesson, a teacher, or I can say, I just need to see the whole thing split. We've tried to be very explicit in representation in our content. And so again, I'm on as administrator to where I can kind of very quickly view these lessons and how they flow and how they work. And you will see the difference between that approach. And let me check the chat real quick. Yeah, that's a really good question, Chris. Right now, I know what, I think I understand what you mean. So for example, if I was, let me go find, if I was writing linear equations, do we have multiple lessons that might bridge that into another thing? And the answer is yes. There's always more we can add. The contract we have been building this for was a state contract, and they limited us to 100 lessons in geometry and 100 lessons in algebra. We are going back and we're going to be adding pre-algebra in the fall. because I want to go back and pick up some of those concepts at a much earlier model. But you can see things, we've got event planners here, we've got a carpenter here. And what we're trying to do, one of the things research tells us, especially for low-income marginalized learners, is we have to create exposure. And one of the things I'm trying to do is say, I'm going to create exposure to as many different opportunities as I can, and equip the teacher to deliver that, right? And one of the reasons why we are being careful to say, so let's say I'm teaching theorems about angles. Well, as a teacher, this is a great opportunity for me to stop and say, hey, here's an application. We're going to go do that lesson, but I'm also going to expose them to a career. And so what we've tried to do is build just a variety of high wage, high growth opportunities through our data. It doesn't mean we can't. I actually got a phone call from a business the other day from another state that saw what we were doing, and this was a large business in a large economic area, and they wanted to know what I would charge if I took and built lessons specifically for their company and then turned around and gave it to a high school. Because they want students to understand, hey, we have jobs right here, but we need to understand how that math's using. So I think there's lots of directions we can go. Here's a really good lesson I show a lot, occupational therapists. It's a really good application and understanding angles and what a therapist has to do in their job. And so we've got the lessons, and we're building them. I also just wanted to show this really quickly because I think we're very unique in this. We've built an entire career center, and again, those quantile measures. So I'm still on as an administrator. So I'm looking at a job here, and I can see what's the highest degree math needed for marketing managers. What's that quantile measure? This is considered a bright outlook job. And so I can do lots of things with this. I can search the careers. I can apply the careers to that learner. The quantile measure, which I just think is incredibly unique, we will be able to do something like this. So hypothetically, let's say I'm interested in health as a student, and I will be able to go in here and say, well, we want to look at 50 careers, or as many careers are in the database. So we will be able to generate a report like this and say, okay, you scored a 700, right? But maybe one of the occupations you're really interested in is over here. And so what we're going to do over time, we want to see that growth as they grow over time. And right now we have that growth set up to measure growth in algebra and geometry. We will be adding pre-algebra throughout the process. So what we're doing is building the system that can track that and build the ability through your lesson management, through your grid. I've got an example of a student that has just, I barely had time to do it, but I just completed my assessment. I did not score very well, but you can see we can do lots of different visual aids. And so even at the beginning, we can say, okay, you took the assessment, my quantile measures here. By the way, here's some occupations, and we can put it, I am just on as a student here. And so the students logging on and they're going, wow, here's all these careers I'm interested in, but here's my score. Again, I can put 20 careers on the screen. This is a student screen, so they will be able to manipulate this. They will be able to go in and look at their lessons. So where am I at in my lessons? What do I need to be working on? And so what we're doing is we're building this platform to support that growth, both as a student and as a learner. But the real thing I think we're focused on is how do we take and connect a student to an occupation, and how do we build that bridge to that process. So does that make sense? I know I flew through that for Tom and Chris, and what I want to do is I want to jump over here and show you our table of contents incomplete. So if, like, for example, in algebra, here is our entire table of contents in algebra. So what I'll do is I'll make sure you guys have access to this, but when you go there, you will be able to see every lesson, every chapter, and every occupation we've chosen for algebra. So what we envision is a teacher will be able to say, okay, I know I've got these 75 lessons in algebra that are embedded in a career. And so how do I now integrate this into my teaching to make it more relevant? That's where I think the real power of what we're doing is bringing that effort to say, how do we really get you prepared both in geometry and algebra, right? And again, you will see different occupations, different approaches to what we're doing. I'm going to pause there. I've been talking for 38 minutes and just see Chris, Tom, both really good questions. Love any feedback or thoughts on what we're doing. Oh, good, Chris. Who vets these lessons? Really good question. We're going through a 3-step process. So we are working with an organization called Synevo. They actually are doing the publishing. And they have probably 50 different mathematical people that are writing our lessons and reviewing them. They send them to our team. Our team is made up of a chief learning officer, a career expert, which is unique because we have to look at it not only through, are we doing the right mathematical approach, but are we aligned the correct way to a career? And then lastly, we go through a QA process. And so we do have a 3-step process we're doing, but we really have built it on that foundation of purpose, generating purpose for learning. How do we make sure that the lessons are engaging up front? And then from there, how do we start to unpack the math? But Chris, we're also brand new. We've been building this for a year. We think it's a unique approach to the market. And so, you know, we're going through multiple models. The state we are rolling this out in is the state of New Mexico. So this fall, we will have 22 school districts out of 90 in the state of New Mexico will be utilizing our math, and we've set up an evaluation model. We will be reviewing it quite a bit, but open to other ideas too. But good question, Chris.
This is Tom. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, good. Tom, can hear you great.
So we are in the middle of a 5-year initiative to regrow career and technical educations for our rural schools. And I mean, we have really rural schools in Southwest Minnesota. Some as small as 20 kids in a graduating class, up to maybe 300. And so we want to encourage teaching academics in a real contextual way. So this year is maybe not the best year to roll something out. One school is just going to start, and we're in distance learning mode for a lot of our schools. But I'm thinking about the fall of 2021. What's the best way to introduce this to administrators and math teachers to see who we might be able to get to pilot a program like this?
Really good idea. And I think what we are set up to do is obviously through the lens of rural education, provide some of those pathway examples to enhance a student's interest outside of rural. We work a lot in rural areas, as you can imagine, parts of New Mexico. I think in those 22 school districts, if I took out Fremont School District, which is the largest, 20 school districts have 7,000 students. So you can do the math, right? Very small school districts. But, you know, and if this is something you want to do, this is something I would be more than willing to make available both this fall and the spring and say, look at your pacing guides. Where are these lessons taught, right? In your pacing guide. So for example, we've organized our lessons to be around a typical geometry classroom. This is how geometry is typically taught. Now, it might be a little bit different. We actually got our hands on 15 different publisher textbooks to do this, to really say this is what people typically are doing. And then you can say, even in the spring, if you wanted to look at the spring, you probably are going to be over here in chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Up on much more of these, I would be more than willing to say, let's pilot it. Let's let people look at it and let's have them start utilizing these lessons as part of their pacing guides. I mean, if I was doing this in a perfect world, and I don't know how every other state's doing, but I would sit down and say, okay, I've got 140, 150 days to teach algebra, roughly, give or take. And I would create my pacing guides and I would sit down and look at my standards. What did I need to cover? And then you start weaving in these lessons as part of your application and your contextual framework. Now, in a CTE environment, we could probably weave in a lot of these, right? As what the state we're working with, they actually want this to become a credit-bearing course so that it can replace their Algebra 1 requirements, right? And so now we don't have enough lessons yet to do that, to where I would classify what we're doing as a core curricula, but we're close. And definitely by next year, we would probably be in a position to say this could be a core algebra or geometry that could, especially for CTE students, replace their requirements. That help, Tom?
Yeah, so right now, a teacher might pick and choose
That's
and use
correct.
this to supplement what they're currently doing. But in the future, this may be a full-fledged course with all of the units and requirements you'd need to make to meet your standards.
That's correct. And you know, what's funny about it is for us to make this a core, we have to go back and we have to build those procedural lessons, which probably is what every teacher's good at, right? And so it makes me laugh that what we've done is we've built the contextual and the application. And for us to have core, we need to go back and build some procedural lessons. But you can make the argument that schools probably are pretty good at that procedural because that's what they've been doing for a long time. And that's why I think as a blended learning model, if people are ready to look at it like that, we're probably well poised to do that. Other questions? We're going to do some other stuff too, Tom. I mean, one of the things we're doing, we're integrating videos. So when the student logs on, we're going to have a video of every career. We've been working with the Department of Labor. And so as they log on, not only are they going to see that career data to where we were looking at here, we also are going to have access to a video to where the student's going to be able to see a 3 to 5 minute video of how that career is actually utilized and people actually talking about it. And you'll see right now we've just got the link, but when a student logs on, they're going to see this front page, which I really am pushing. Now, the other thing we can do, I know I've got Minnesota on here. Tom, are you from Minnesota, or Chris, or is that you?
I'm from Minnesota, this Tom.
Yeah, and so we could make this data right here, because it's digital, we can make that pull your state data. So right now it's pulling national. So if we want to get specific and say Minnesota Career Outlook, we can pull that data on the screen and say, here's what it looks like, right? And so we can customize it a little bit and make it even more specific to Minnesota. And so, because as I was showing you that other policy platform, oh, thanks, Chris, North Dakota. And so we could do the same in North Dakota. So you saw what we did for Ted in Nebraska. We put all 16 of his school districts in, and we pulled that labor market data to him. Likewise, we would just pull that labor market data into our actual lesson. Good questions, though. Really good, thoughtful approaches. And by the way, both Tom and Chris, I'll be glad to give you access. I think if you go to just our pathwaytocareers.com, and I'll post it in the chat room. So if you just go to pathwaytocareers.com, this is kind of our front-facing website, and you will see career supported and career prepared. So you'll see our policy tool and our curriculum here. So if you click here and then view our work, learn more, it'll actually pull you into an actual lesson and a teacher's lesson, as well as a table of contents. So you will be able to pull all of that and kind of digest it a little bit. I will post that real quick in the chat room for you. And the same is true on our policy. So again, if I just go to Pathway to Careers, let me copy that real quick into the chat so you guys have it. But if I click on this login feature right here, this will get you into all of our different sites. Nebraska Education Service Center, the state program. We did the entire state of New Mexico. We've done the entire state of Tennessee. Since I know I've got some rural people, we partnered on a U.S. Department of Agriculture project focused only on rural education. And so this is a project called Southwest Technical Career Readiness Network, but it was funded and developed in partnership with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so we've been working with them on, could this become a model for them? And so we've been working with lots of rural partners. And so I want to add that to the conversation as well. That is correct. A very good question, Chris. The answer is yes, right? It is being developed to where a student could work independently or a teacher could facilitate the lesson. So we are working on it for both ways. And so you will have the ability to do both. Good question though, because we started out with the manuscript, and when I say manuscript, and I do believe this is where a lot of people get it wrong, is how do we be incredibly deliberate with our design, right? And I think a lot of people throw things together. I can tell you, even as a small business in what we've been doing, I have been approached by 10 other companies, and their comment to me was, well, we already have math, you don't need to do anything. And going back to the math scores and going back to relevancy and what we know works, I would argue they don't have it. What they have is a traditional approach that they've packaged and put online. And what we're trying to do is say, we have to create engagement around careers, we have to make it relevant, and we have to show them a pathway. And from that, we can unpack math, we can make it meaningful, and we can show them, here's why you need to know this on every single lesson. And so that's our goal. But good questions, and I think good approaches for each of you to think about. We've been working with U.S. Department of Agriculture on a kind of a pilot project because they want to bridge in and figure out if they like our pilot, which by the way is with 4 rural school districts in Tennessee, then they want to consider making that an option through some of their funding across other rural projects. Other thoughts, questions? Good questions though, Chris and Tom, on our approach. And I'll also open it up to the panelists, John, Chris, or any of you guys with questions. again, would welcome the feedback. We have been working on this for the better part of a year. And I think, we've taken our time and really tried to unpack how to do it. So,
Well, thank you so much, Joseph.
Chris,
That's
and
very good.
Chris, Chris, I hope you are correct with your last post in the chat. We have, I can't tell you how many math providers we turned down because they've wanted us to take shortcuts, and we just refused to do it. And we've taken our time and said, we know if we can equip teachers, prepare them with meaningful, relevant lessons, I think we're going to have a big impact. And so love the feedback, and I think that's great.
Well, thank you very much, Joseph. That was very informative. As a former math teacher and algebra teacher, albeit maybe back in the early 80s, that still would have been great to have some tools like this back during that time for sure. But we sincerely appreciate your presentation today. Pathway to Careers is a great business partner with AESA. We don't have very many business partners, but those that we do, we try to pick the best, and we know we've got the best with Pathway to Careers, and we appreciate that relationship that we have with them. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us at AESA or directly to Joseph. We appreciate your time and being with us today. And with that, thanks again, and we'll see you at our next event. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, John, Chris, and team. I appreciate it. Any questions, you guys let me know, okay?
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.